One of the theorists who you might say left the biggest footprint on this field, so had the most impact on this area of study, this approach, this humanistic approach, is Carl Rogers. And we have a lot of interesting information to go over with Carl Rogers' theory, starting with the self-concept. Okay? So the self-concept, Carl Rogers expanded this idea, or how people thought about it, in a really interesting way. He split it up into an actual and an ideal, and there's no denying that. You know, we do think of ourselves in this way. So if you think about it, you have an actual self and you have an ideal self, and you could describe either one of those, right? And they're going to be at least a little different. Okay? How different they are. You see in this picture, he's talking about this, and he's talking about how different they are at this point. Okay? But that is has quite an impact on your mental health. Okay? So when we say incongruency and mental health, we're saying that the more incongruency that there is between your actual and your ideal self, okay, the more mental health problems that you're going to have. In other words, the lower your mental health will be. Now, I want you to think about this, because this is a really good test question. It tests you on things like how well you remember correlational research, and relationships, and that information from Psych 101 too. Because, you know, we could say, what kind of a correlation does Carl Rogers, do you expect from Carl Rogers' work, between congruency and mental health? And if we said that, it would be a positive relationship, right? The more congruency between your actual and ideal self, the better your mental health. That's a positive relationship. But if we could say, what is the correlation? What kind do you expect between incongruency and mental health? And that would be negative. The more incongruency, the poorer your mental health. And that's again, once we know something about one, it helps us predict the other, but it's an inverse relationship, otherwise known as a negative relationship. But let's take a closer look at that. So I want you to imagine that on top, the yellow spheres are the ideal self, and the blue ones are the actual self. And so we've got one on top and one on the bottom. And which person would you expect to be the most mentally healthy? Obviously, the one on top, right? All right. Let's look at some more of this really interesting theory. Now, here's the deal. Rogers could talk about this, and he could go out and he could show it with research, right? But what do you think the question was that everybody would be so interested in at this point? And the question is, well, where does this incongruency come from? So we all want to be mentally healthy, but where does incongruency come from? If if your outline looked more like the person on the bottom here, why is that different from up here? Where does all this incongruency come from? Okay? And this is really interesting. Carl Rogers said this comes from, and again, two different ways to word it. You can say a lack of unconditional love in your life, or you could say too much conditional love, right? And if you truly understand the concept, you'll be able to understand it no matter which way someone talks about it or which way it is worded, for instance, on a test question. So let's think about this. So incongruency comes from too much conditional love, or not enough unconditional love. First off, what is unconditional love, right? That's something we need more of, or we want as much as we can get of. What is unconditional love? And probably the best answer to that is love with no strings attached, right? And no matter what, that person is going to love you. I want you to think about this carefully now. Okay? How many of you feel like there is at least one person in your life where no matter what you did, even if you went out and killed 15 innocent people tomorrow, okay, that they would still love you. They would still visit you in prison. They would still love you just as much as before. And I'm not saying that they would condone your behavior, but they would not think less of you as a human being. They would still love you that much. How many of you feel like there's one person, at least, in your life? Now, when I ask this of a class of 115, we get somewhere between a quarter and a third of the students that will raise their hand. Okay? And if you were one that would have raised your hand, Carl Rogers would say, you have a real gift that was given to you in your life. Because that is all you need, is one person who believes in you that strongly, okay, who feels that positively about you, for you to find the right path in life and to benefit from, stable mental health. All it takes is one person. Well, if that's true, you can imagine where his person-centered therapy is going to go. What is the therapist's responsibility? What are they going to try to provide? And you might say unconditional positive love. Well, I think we would all agree that love is a very strong word to use when you're talking about a therapist and a client. But unconditional positive regard. Well, think about that. If you have to like this person so much that there's nothing that they could do that would lessen how much you respect them and you like them. It doesn't mean, again, that you would condone their behavior. Hey, but if this is your goal as a therapist, for one thing, you really have to get to know this person well, right? And also, on top of that, you really, truly have to like this person, because Carl Rogers was the first person to point out it has to be genuine. You cannot fool anyone with this. It has to be genuine. Okay? Carl Rogers really had a gift of finding the very best in people and focusing on this, and this real ability to have unconditional positive regard for most of his clients. And his advice, if you could not feel that way about a client, was you needed to refer them, because again, it has to be genuine. Unconditional positive regard. In other words, this person has gone off the right track because they don't have this in their life. But one person alone can put this in their life. Now, why did he call his therapy person-centered? Some of you have taken classes about therapies and might know the answer to this already. And that is because Carl Rogers actually thought that psychodynamic theorists were a bit arrogant. Okay? He felt that no therapist could know better than the client what's best for them. The therapist should not give the client advice. Their job is to give them unconditional positive regard, because once the client experiences this and knows it's there and knows it's not going to go away, has learned to trust it, they will be able to get back on the right track themselves. And again, nobody knows what the right track is better than they do. Not even the therapist. Okay? Now, Carl Rogers had a really interesting technique that he used in his therapy, and that Rogerian therapists use today, oftentimes in their therapy, very heavily. And that is something that is called reflection. Okay? And this is paraphrasing. Okay? You might say, well, wait a minute. I don't want my therapist paraphrasing everything I say to them back to me. That's not what I'm paying them good money for, right? Well, I want that advice. Well, if you believe as Carl Rogers did, and he really did have some great success rates with his clients, okay? But if you believe like he does, no, you deep down, you know what is the right for you. We just need, the therapist's job is to bring that out for you to bring that out, to pave the road for you to be able to bring that out by giving you unconditional positive regard. And the reason that they're using reflection it has some very distinct advantages and things that will really help this therapy relationship. Okay, the most obvious one is, well, they want to validate what you're saying, because all of us, respond to this reflection in a way, when it's done genuinely, okay, in a way that we feel validated. In other words, if we're telling our therapist how we feel and the therapist tells us back, but in different words, in their own words, they paraphrase it in their own words, okay, we feel that our feelings are validated. So it serves that function. It really helps to help validate your feelings and what you are expressing, which causes you to then feel comfortable expressing and sharing more. But it also serves another very interesting function, reflection does. And that is, if the therapist misunderstands you, they're going to find out really quickly. They're going to find out from you. So you can just do this and practice it on people. It's actually a really good thing in relationships for this reason. Is if somebody is talking to you about how you hurt their feelings, and you paraphrase it, put it back to them. You feel that you feel really bummed out because I said this or I said that, and it doesn't feel to you that that's a very respectful thing to say. Really is a positive way to respond to those kinds of problems, because they're going to feel validated when you say it, and you can say, I really didn't mean to make you feel that way, and I'm really sorry. I really do have respect for you, so on and so forth. But I want you to imagine this. You go out and try this on people, okay? Or imagine that you're a client and your therapist is paraphrasing back to you, and they didn't understand what you said. They misunderstood it. When they paraphrase it back to you, you're going to be going, no, that's not what I said. What I meant was blah, 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 right? So it catches misunderstandings early on. It clears them up. Okay? Very valuable tool, reflection. Carl Rogers is also really known for his encounter groups, and this is a really, really big deal in the 70s. These Rogerian encounter groups, so not just Rogers, but other therapists would have them. People would try to do them on their own without a therapist. And what's an encounter group? Roger talked about the fully functioning person. Remember that humanistic psychologists focus on mental health. In fact, humanistic psychologists like Carl Rogers were some of the first who came out and said, why should therapy just be for people who are experiencing problems? It should be for everybody who just wants to grow as a human being. And so Carl Rogers talked about the fully functioning person. And, if you had to put this in a nutshell, you would say, be all that you can be. It would be that Army slogan, right? Be all that you can be. Okay? And he broke it down in different ways, and he said, people need, to be a more fully functioning person, you want to be open to your experiences, good and bad, open to learning from them, open to experiencing them fully and learning from them. You want to live each moment as it comes. So you don't want to spend your life living in the past or living in an idealized or fantasized future. You want to live in the moment now. Sounds very Zen-like, right? Okay? And you want to be sensitive to the needs of others, but not unduly affected by norms. Okay? So some social norms are there for a reason, right? Some of them you really do want to be affected by, and we're glad everybody is affected by. For instance, getting on the on-ramp to the highway instead of getting off it. Okay? I'm really glad that people follow that norm. But some of them are more arbitrary, right? Like, only women wear skirts or something like that. And he said, he's not saying, if you're a guy, you need to go out there and wear a skirt to prove you're a fully functioning person. He wasn't saying that at all, but he was saying, if you feel like wearing a skirt and you want to wear a skirt, it doesn't matter what gender you are, you should do it. That's it. Okay? So be true to yourself. and to experience your feelings fully. Just like your experiences, your feelings are something to learn from. Okay, so these encounter groups are really big in the 70s. I always picture these really big, long sideburns and flowered, Hawaiian flowered shirts and other images that I have from the 70s. But people would form these groups and they would meet, and their goal was to become a more fully functioning person. And they would help each other to, in other words, become closer to their ideal selves, encourage each other and help each other to do that. Okay. We're not done with Carl Rogers yet, because something very cool he came up with. It's called the Q sort. Now, if you were a client of his, wouldn't, in his time, what he would often do is on your very first appointment, he would give you a stack of cards to go through, index cards that would have like one adjective on them, like creative, okay? And your job was to go through all these cards and to pull the ones into one stack for that described you, yourself, okay? What do you think he's going to have you do when you get done? First off, he's going to record what cards you pulled, and now we have computers that do that, right? But then he's going to redo, shuffle that deck, and then give it all back to you. And you might have guessed this, he's going to have you do it for your ideal self. And what's really cool is a couple years down the road, let's say you feel you're ready to leave therapy, and Rogers also feels you do, or your Rogerian therapist. Not unusual for them to give you this again, because it's a great measure to see what percentage, for instance, of their clients have actually benefited from this kind of therapy. And again, Rogers was very gifted, but he had a very high percentage of clients who benefited significantly. So we see a significant difference in the correlation between their actual and ideal self at the beginning and at the end.